Angela, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited for this conversation.
Oh, we are so excited too. And once we found out you were coming on, I was like, cannot wait for today.
Tax liens and tax deeds, that's sexy right now. It's
Yeah.
funny. We were just having this conversation that you've got people selling out ballrooms right now talking about tax liens and tax deeds, but it sounds like this is something you've been doing a long time. You didn't just get on the bandwagon.
Nope, I've been in this area for about 10 years now.
Okay, fantastic. Well, so tell our audience really quick where you're from and maybe give us a little bit of backstory. How'd you get into this space?
Yeah, so I live in Florida and I've been in the real estate market since 2006, if everyone can think back to the foreclosure time period.
Oh, yeah.
So I just thought, there's got to be other ways other than, the real estate market to invest in real estate, but have a little bit more certainty because I'm very conservative. And that's kind of how I stumbled upon tax liens.
Were you it's funny, I got in 2005, so I can kind of commiserate with you. Everything was fantastic, 2005, 6, maybe even a little bit of 7, and then sort of everything fell apart. What were you doing back? Were you doing traditional real estate before you got into tax deeds and liens?
Yeah, so I got my real estate license and I started doing short sales and foreclosures because I'm a numbers person. And so I really jive well with investors. And if I can find a property for you, do the numbers and show you why it's a good investment, then I was just really good with connecting with people who had money and wanted to get into real estate.
Well, especially Florida too. Being down in Florida, you were in Tampa. Were you in Tampa at the time?
I was, and we were picking up like single family properties for $50,000, running them for $1,000. And even if we got like a Section 8 tenant in it, which is almost guaranteed, then we were just getting phenomenal returns at that time. So I got in at the worst market, but for the type of person that I am, it was the best market to learn.
Yeah, if you're working with investors back then, and that's the same with thing with in Atlanta, we were doing turnkey. So same thing, we're buying distressed properties for 40, 50, $60,000, fixing them up. And then of course they were cash flowing like crazy. And so if you were working with investors back then, they were just gobbling those things up.
Yeah, I wish I would have done more, but hindsight.
I know. That's what I said. If I'd only just kept one for every 10 that I sold, I mean, geez, I'd be sitting on a stock buy. But that's the thing. When you're in the business, you're in the business of dealing property, right? You're not necessarily always in the business of keeping. So we tell all of our franchisees now, man, just every now and then, at least 1 or 2 a year, just keep one. You're not going to regret it 10, 15 years down the road.
Yeah, I take a little different approach today, but yeah, that's definitely a good route for some people.
Well, so talk to us. So at some point in time, you're working with investors, they're buying these cash flowing properties. What sparked your interest in tax liens?
Well, I started to think that there's got to be other ways for us to invest in real estate because I was tired of managing properties. I was tired of, getting that call on Christmas because everyone had people at their house. Now they clogged their toilet, right? And I just couldn't find a property manager that I thought was doing a phenomenal job. They don't earn a ton of money, and I get that. So, they're providing a service for you, but I just got tired of being in the single family rental space. So I am definitely someone who loves to read books. I am an avid reader. I listen to podcasts a lot nowadays, and I just stumbled upon a book, right? I'm a numbers person. So for anyone who wants to write a book, if you want to reach that numbers audience, put a number on the front of your book and most likely write it up. So I came across a book called The 16% Solution. It was talking about investing in real estate liens. And I thought, okay, I don't really know this topic, so I'm going to pick up this book and start reading. And that's how I started on this journey about tax lien investing in Florida.
So I'm curious, having read that book, what was your first deal? When did you actually take the step and say, I'm going to put this to use and actually do it?
Yeah, almost right away. But I mean, in Florida, you have a small window. There's about 2 months that we can look at properties and bid on them before that window closes. So the timing for me was perfect. It was in the beginning part of the year, and I started to do a little bit of research, and I did a couple bids online, and I ended up winning 2 of those. And I just sat and wait, and then I figured I've got to learn a little bit more of the process. Otherwise, I could end up losing a lot of money, right? So just continued that education piece, but that's the thing. It's like if you learn about something, pull the trigger right away, do it yourself first, and then hopefully you can teach other people.
Yeah.
So were you an active agent at the time? It's sort of just doing this on the side. How did that shake out?
Yeah, I was a co-owner of a top RE/MAX office in the country, and we hired out a great team that did a lot of the day-to-day stuff. So this just kind of gave me a way to think about if I had to go through the entire process, which we can talk about, then this could potentially be either a rental property or a listing for our team. So it was something that I just kind of did on the side.
Gotcha. and quickly realized, hey, I'm making good money here. This is maybe something I should focus my attention on. And then did that turn into a full-time gig for you?
It did for quite a bit. I still do a lot of that for my own portfolio today. I've been in a fund where we raised money to be able to do this type of investing. And then I've also taught other people how to do this as well. But I think it's just, when we can dive right into the details of it, but it's a great way to get into the real estate investing space without having all of the problems or things that come along with owning single family rental properties.
Sure. All right. So let's educate our audience. Let's talk for a minute about what it means to buy either a tax lien or a tax deed.
Yes. So it's going to vary from state to state, county to county. So I'm going to focus on Florida. It's where I live and it's where I currently invest myself. So what happens is you have a property and you have to pay property taxes, right? So it could be a house, a condo, townhome. It could be a commercial property. If you cannot pay those taxes, the government does rely on you, right? They have budgets that they're going to fund and they rely on those property taxes in order to fund it. They use that money for streets, for teachers, police officers. So they want that money. So if a property owner doesn't pay their taxes here in Florida for the first year, they become delinquent, then an investor like myself can come in, buy that tax lien, which means it's a piece of paper. I'm giving my money to the government and they're going to tell me upfront exactly the interest rate they're going to pay me for the money that I'm giving to them. So I love that because you know what you're going to get upfront. It's certain for you, right? The government is going to pay and you're in first position with that property, which means if there is a foreclosure, my lien gets paid off first because the government gets paid off first, right? No one trumps the government. So it's just a great way for you to get into the real estate market and know what the interest rate is that you're going to be paid for up front. And it's just like another avenue that we can kind of put in the portfolio of your real estate investing.
So across the country, is it the same interest rate?
No, every state is different and every state has different laws in which they handle. So there's differences between a tax lien, which is what I just talked about, and then a tax deed, which is the actual deed to the property.
And so what I know, I typically see the number 18% thrown out there. It sounds like the book you read was 16%. What do you typically see then in different states?
Yeah, so Florida will pay up to 18%. That's the max. They also have a minimum, which is 5%. So you're going to earn at least 5%, could be up to 18%. Now, when you're going online and bidding on the actual tax lien, me as the investor, I'm telling the county what I'm willing to accept. So I could bid 16%. I could bid 14%. And obviously the county is going to pick the person with the lowest interest rate because that's what's great advantage for them. But I mean, if you think about other states like Illinois will pay up to 48%. And
Wow.
we've got Iowa that pays up to 24%. So it really depends on where you live. You've got to do your research, figure out and start in your own backyard. Like part of my process is I drive by the properties. I want to know what I potentially might have to own someday.
Right.
So if you're going to get into this space, start with your local government, figure out what the rules are for your county and what your state does, whether it's liens or deeds. But a lot of these states can pay some really high interest rates. And why would you put money in a bank when you can earn 18% just holding a piece of paper for a couple of years?
Sure.
And then how's that interest being paid? Is it paid when?
It's paid at redemption. So one of two things is going to happen. Here in Florida, if I buy that tax lien, right? So property owner doesn't pay their taxes. Maybe, a death in the family, they lost a job, some medical reasons. Usually people don't pay their property taxes for, some type of financial distress reason. So I'm holding on to this piece of paper. Now, one of two things is going to happen. That property owner is either going to pay back the taxes when they financially can, because maybe they live in the property and they just fell behind and now they can pay their property taxes. If they pay their property taxes to the county then turns around, gives me my money back with the interest we agreed upon up front. So that's one way. Two, say, for example, that same property owner never is able to pay their property taxes. Then either myself or if they have a loan, one of us is going to end up foreclosing on that property. And then when that sale happens, that's when I get. So Florida's a little bit longer. We call it a redemption period, right? There's a little bit longer that you might be holding that money. Could be 2 years, could be 3 years, maximum 3 years in Florida. But it just depends on what happens with that property owner.
And is the interest rate, is it annualized or is it
Yes.
just a flat interest rate?
Nope, it's annualized.
And so if you end up holding it 3 years, you're earning that same, let's call it 16% year over year over year.
Every year.
I
Correct.
gotcha. Now, if they redeem early though, let's say in that first year, they're like 2 months in, they're like, I got the money now, I'm going to pay off, I'm going to redeem. It's not annualized then, right? I thought you get the
Correct.
full 16%, right? In that 2
Yeah,
month period.
It depends on the county and what you go into and agree upon upfront. So some of them will have it prorated. So some of the states, even if they offer you 18% for the year and that property owner pays it back in 6 months, they may prorate it. So again, do your research, know what the laws are, where your county is, and what their redemption periods might look like, so that you can understand what you could be making. But still, if I earn 9% in 6 months versus 18% in a year, I'm still doing pretty good.
Yeah. So auctions, let's talk about those for a second. It sounds like where you are, they're online, but in a lot of places it's in person. They're crying them at the courthouse steps, right? Is that how the tax deeds and liens work?
Yeah. So when you talk about tax deeds, so we'll take Georgia, for example, right? Because I know that you said you're in Georgia.
Yep.
They don't offer the lien. What they're going to do is, if the taxpayer doesn't pay their taxes, then they're going to foreclose on the property. And then they're going to take that deed or the ownership of that property and sell it at an auction. And yeah, the auctions are done in place, but it's so important that you have your whole your process set up before you even get to that day of sale, because there's so many steps that could get you in trouble if you don't do it correctly. But yeah, a state like Georgia they don't want to deal with the liens. They want to just say, here's the property, go into the highest bidder who wants it. That way they can get their money back for the taxes that are past due and owed.
And so talk about that, like how that really works, because you're buying the deed, but there's most of the time there's a mortgage in place, right? They haven't necessarily foreclosed on the first position lender, have they? And that loan stays in place even as you buy that deed in most cases, correct?
Well, the tax lien comes first. So
Right.
property taxes are going to come first. And yeah, if there's a loan on the property, most likely a representative from the bank is going to go bid on that property because they want to be first in line. But say, for example, I own the lien on the property and I do the foreclosure here in Florida. If you have a state that has liens and deeds, just like we described, I'm first position. So if I do the foreclosure, that mortgage follows the borrower. They don't have a right to the property unless they foreclose and take it over first. If I'm going to foreclose, then I take over the property, and that mortgage has to follow the borrower, which the title becomes clear of that loan because I am in first position. The government's always in first position.
So when people are bidding, I guess in a tax deed state where you're actually buying, because there's a distinction, obviously. When you're buying the deed, are these bidders buying the house at what it's worth, or they're buying it at what the tax deed was valued at?
Yeah, it depends. If there's no loan on the property, whatever the highest bidder is willing to pay, they're going to pay. So that's part of your due diligence, right? You need to drive by the property. You're not going to be able to do an inspection. Obviously, if someone still lives there or not, you don't have access to it. So you've got to take in worst case scenario. If I have to do all of these repairs, what is that going to look like, right? And then when you go to the auction, you do need to have your number in your mind, right? And sometimes you can get carried away, especially we call it like the eBay effect, right? You're going in, you're bidding, you don't want to go too high. But a lot of times, the fund that I was talking about that was just raising money, they were earning on average about 90% when they bought the deed of the property, which means we're just taking the deed. Then we have to go through the redemption process, making sure that the title is clear because it depends on the county and the state, and then just turn around and, send it off to the investors that we're just wanting to flip, because we don't want to hold it very long. That's part of the process that we had in place, is to be able to flip it right away. We're not trying to earn the most money by fixing it and flipping it, but we just want to dispose of it, get out, and then rinse and repeat and do it again.
Now, in Georgia, I know that typically if you get the deed, you still got to go through like a 12-month quiet title petition where you're just sort of waiting for everything to go through, and then we have clear title. Was your fund selling it prior to quiet title, or would you guys go through that full process and then wholesale it?
We want to be able to go through the whole process so that we know that the end buyer understands that they're getting it free and clear.
Yeah, I gotcha. So as a homeowner, let's say you owned your house outright, you forgot to pay your taxes, you get foreclosed on by the county. and then the county puts it up for sale. And let's say it sells for $200,000 to the highest bidder.
Mhm.
If you want to redeem your house back, you're having to pay that $200,000 plus 18% to get your house back.
Not exactly, no. So
Okay.
in that instance, if the property went up for auction and it went up for higher than, say, all the liens that are involved, right? And we have a little piece of equity, depending on the county and the state, that money will go back to the homeowner. So they don't always lose all of that equity when it goes through that whole foreclosure process. It just depends on the county and the state. So like Georgia, for example, you take that same example and there's all these tax liens and maybe there's some code enforcement. All of those get paid off. And if there's money left over, then the county will actually take that money and send it back to the homeowner.
Okay. I got you. So in essence, they're paying what they owe plus interest, and then anything above and beyond that, they're getting back.
Right. So
okay. But they still got to come up with that payment. They might have to come up with a $200,000 or $300,000 payment.
It's potentially possible. Yeah.
Interesting. So for you guys in Florida, it's a little different because you guys are buying the liens. What's like the quintessential perfect best case scenario for you?
Yeah,
what does that look like? How much are you spending, and what's the turnaround?
Yeah. So process is very important. And just like anything else you're buying in real estate, you want to have your buy box, right? So for me, I'm looking for at least a 2 to 3 bedroom. I won't go less than that. I'm looking at a single family house. Stay away from anything like a condo or a townhome that might have an HOA, because you don't know what that could look like at redemption period. They have all those fees and attorney costs. I don't want to deal with an HOA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my buy box is at least 2 to 3 bedrooms, single family home, no HOAs. And I want to be in an area where people are still moving, right? Where I'm still seeing activity of people buying and selling houses, because that will help with the value of the property should I have to foreclose later. So say, for example, this year from April to June is when our time frame opened for tax lien bidding online. I went through, did my process. You picked out the properties, average probably about $3,000 tax lien per property for something in my own buy box.
Okay.
And once I win, then it's sit and wait. It could be redeemed in 6 months. It could be I have to foreclose in 3 years. So I have a solid plan for each of those, exit plans for each of those in place, but I'm sitting and waiting. And so that's another thing I love about tax liens, is because yes, I put in work for a couple months this year, but for the rest of the year, I'm not going to do anything. So it is a passive income strategy, because I have a lien, which is in first position. I know what interest rate I'm getting into. I have an exit plan at some point in the future. And for the rest of the year, I don't even have to do anything for it. There's nothing else for me to do once the closing of the lien occurs, unless I know that I'm heading into foreclosure, which won't happen for a couple of years.
And is that because it's Florida, and Florida just takes a little longer to work through the systems? I mean, I know foreclosures.
Yes.
It's a judicial state, right? So you're going through that whole process.
Oh yeah, so much fun. But yeah, understanding that going into it, my hope is that, I also, one of the things I look for is a property that has a homestead on it, which means that the owner still hopefully lives in the property. Hopefully they just want to redeem it at some point and not have to go through the foreclosure. That's my best case scenario. But it's just part of the buy box that I look at. Other people have different areas that they're going to look at, or maybe they look for investors that are just going to abandon a property. I don't want that. That's just not what I'm looking for, but there's just so many ways that you could get into this field and still have a great result too.
What percentage do you find in that price point in your buy box are redeeming versus you're having to foreclose?
I have never had to foreclose on a property. So pretty high percentage of property homeowners eventually pay it off.
Really?
Or if the foreclosure happens, it's going to be the lender and they have to pay me back anyways.
Okay. I got you. Yeah. Because most of these that you're bidding on, is that something you look for? Do you look for ones that happen to have loans? Because now the mortgage company's super motivated to get this worked out.
I look for loans, but it has to be under a certain percentage of what I feel like the value is today, because then we can create some issues later if the loan, I just want to make sure that there's some equity and that I'm going to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
First position, we're still going to get paid, but it's just part of what I look for.
What else are you looking for? What other pitfalls? What else can kind of derail this that you're looking for?
Yeah. So I said earlier that you need to be able to drive by the property. I don't rely on Google Maps, because there could be a house fire, say, for example, and the property owner collected the insurance for the house fire and then abandoned the property. I don't want dirt. I don't want something that I can't easily turn around and flip if I have to foreclose. So I do drive by the property, and why I recommend to people to start in your own backyard. When we had the fund, we had a team that was able to drive state to state to look at the properties. That's not something that I want to do. So really figuring out what is your buy box? What are you, what type of investor are you and what are you looking for? So making sure you're not relying on Google Maps is a big mistake I've seen a lot of people do.
That makes sense. Any other liens or any other sort of hair that you're looking for before you would bid on it?
Yeah, the one unknown, and it's hard to find out, even when I use a title company to do all my lien searches before I make my bids. The one lien that will trump all of us is a federal tax lien. So if they have IRS back taxes due, that one's difficult for us to figure out on the front end. I haven't had that situation, but I have had someone else who ended up having to pay off an IRS tax lien before they could flip the property.
Mm-hmm.
That could be an unknown for you too. So I haven't figured that one out yet, but I think that'll be a good one. And really, with the advancement of technology, a lot of this that I do for myself is can be time consuming, and it's a manual process. So I'm working with like ChatGPT and a couple companies to figure out how do we take this entire process and use AI to like input the data, right? Here's a list of properties. Here's my buy box. Tell me which ones I should be looking at instead of me manually going through, pages and pages of potential tax liens.
That's cool. Yeah, that'd be something to figure out. Because so for you, how much time are you putting in to I guess during this couple month window?
Yeah, probably maybe 100 hours, depending on how many properties we're gonna bid on.
Okay. And how much money would you want to deploy, and how many properties are you going to bid on in the course of 2 months?
I've been in the commercial real estate space for the last couple of years, which has been extremely tough. So this year I didn't bid on as many properties as I would normally, but I could easily do $30,000-$50,000 worth of tax lien bids.
And that could be 10 to 15 different houses that you're sitting on.
And as a bidder, make sure you have the money available right away. Because again, you're dealing with the government. They want their money. So if I won on all $50,000, I need to make sure that money is readily available for me to pay off the bidding.
Gotcha. And most of the time, are you getting 16%? What are you getting there? What's the competition like, I guess is the question. What are you typically bidding for?
Yeah, now that interest rates are a little bit higher on a savings account, we're able to bid a little bit more. About 80% of tax liens are bought up by institutions because it is a safer investment for them to kind of keep their cash. So right now we're seeing probably about 12-14%. A few years ago when interest rates were lower, then they were accepting less. A lot of the counties were accepting less, and some of those institutions were accepting less because they had nowhere else to put their cash to earn, 5-6%. Now you can go to a bank and earn that versus a few years ago. So the rates are a little bit better right now. I would think and project that as interest rates go back down, if we do see that, hopefully next year, then we'll see some of the buybacks, like the box for next year, what I offer as interest rate might be a little bit lower.
Interesting. Well, and so let's say you bid, you get 12 to 14%. Realistically, if they're redeeming, within a shorter time frame, your annualized rate's actually higher than that, right? So your money's maybe coming back to you, then you can redeploy it somewhere else.
Correct. Yep. I want in and out as quickly as possible with the least amount of headaches. Yeah.
And so what's the average length to redemption that you're finding on the ones that you're buying?
Yeah, 1 to 2 years. I haven't had anything much longer than that.
Wow. Still 1 to 2 years. I was thinking maybe 6 months. I guess people don't get their act together that quick.
Yeah, I know. And then if you think about the time period too, the end of the bidding in Florida is June 1st. So if they're in financial trouble, it's usually from the holidays, and sometimes they don't come back around until the next year when they figure things out. Especially when you start to get those notices that you could be foreclosed on and lose your home.
Yeah. So how many states are tax lien versus tax deed? Do you kind of have a sense of how it breaks down, or even in the Southeast where you operate, is the tax deed the unusual one, or what do you find?
No, tax deed is more common, especially in your bigger states like New York, Hawaii, California, some of the states that we don't go into. We still want to be in a more friendlier state. There are some states that are still very friendly to the property owner, which I get, but I think it really is an education process. I think that's the majority of the reasons why homeowners lose their home is because they're just not educated on what they can do. And they figure that they can just give it back, when if there's equity there, depending on the state and the county, they might not get it. So why not sell it ahead of time, or do like what you guys probably know is cash for keys, to get some money out of it to be able to move on to the next point of your life instead of losing the property altogether.
Sure. How interesting. So what's your sense? The most best investors that get into this, are they in it for the property, or are they in it for the return on investment? What do you find?
If you're more conservative, they're definitely in it for the interest rate. So that's something we can talk about too. So the disadvantages of putting your money in a tax lien versus owning a single family property and renting it out is there's no deductions, right? You don't get to deduct any expenses, and the income that you're making is interest income. So it's taxed at whatever your current tax rate is.
Right.
For Florida, we don't have state income tax, but it's going to be taxed at whatever my federal rate is. If you live in a state that has state income tax, you're going to pay taxes on it just like anything else that you generate income. So you don't get the tax advantages of owning real estate like depreciation or any of the write-offs that you would normally have. But I also don't have the headache with dealing with tenants either. So it's you got to decide, what kind of investor are you? What do you want out of this process?
You'd mentioned that the fund that you were working with was getting a 90% return. That had to have been because they were getting real estate and turning it and selling it.
Yes, that was their main focus, was finding the deeds of the properties, or the states that did deeds versus tax liens, and then doing the foreclosure process. Like a state like Alabama, for example, only has a 6-month redemption period. So if you go and you win the deed of the property, that process in which you have to get that clear title is only about 6 months. Some of the other states are a little bit longer. So it's really like, you've got to know your rules of your counties and your states.
So this fund would identify properties they felt like that they could foreclose on as short amount of time as possible. They get clear title of the property and then turn around and wholesale it to an investor is what it sounds like.
Correct.
Interesting. What an interesting space. I mean, there's so many different ways to tackle it, but like you said, there's so many nuances based on what state you're in and then what county you're in. You're talking about this. How are you telling people to get educated?
Yeah. We have so much information that's free that I necessarily didn't have 10 years ago. Yes, I could read a book, but we've got podcasts, we've got YouTube. Like you said, there's people teaching courses. But what I do is I challenge you. So if you're thinking about getting into this space and you want to learn more, have the person who's teaching you, mentoring you, coaching you, or wherever it is that you're getting your information, show me. I want to see your own track record, because just like any other space in real estate, people can claim that they're coaches, but I want to know that you have a successful track record before you teach anything. And that's me. I've been in this specific space for over 10 years. I've been in real estate over 20 years. I can show you my track record. I've lost money. I've learned a lot in this process. And so, having someone who maybe just started in this business, not the best coach or mentor, because they haven't been through cycles to understand what could change in the future, right? Interest rates could change in the future. The county could change their rules. We're in a presidential year, and who knows what the next year of interest rates might look like. So that could really affect your return and what happens. So understanding you've been through cycles to know what could happen in the future. It's just my conservative way of thinking, but I also don't swing for the fences either. So that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's good. Finding a mentor that knows the space, that's been in it for a while. Are there any books that you would recommend, more recent ones maybe that are up to speed on current laws and whatnot?
Yeah, because it changes so much. The 16% solution book, I know that they've redone it a few times.
Okay.
Another one, I believe it's just called Understanding Tax Liens and Tax Deed Investing. Look on Amazon and look for some books that are recent, and do a couple so that you get several different points of views and different information. And find a mentor. You don't have to do this alone. And you can get in this space for like $500, right? I've seen tax liens for $500 in some of the areas of Florida. So just know that you don't need, tens of thousands of dollars to start. Start with one, go through the process, figure it out. And then next year, when it comes back around, you've had enough time to educate yourself, and you can go bigger.
Sure.
You're a seasoned veteran at this point. You've been doing this a long time. What do you wish you would have known when you first started out? You read a lot, you learned a lot, talk a lot about education. What do you wish you would have known looking back however many years when you started?
Yeah, understand, like having a good solid process going into it and having a good solid exit plan. So one of the things that I do that I didn't necessarily do before was having a title company do the lien search before I bid. There's a lot of things I can do. Like I can call the county and see if there's any code violations, right? I can do some quick Google searches to figure out a little bit more about the property, but the title company has access to a lot more information than I do as a consumer. So having the right title company do like bulk searches for me upfront before making the bids, I wish I would have done that a little bit earlier on. But thankfully for me, it hasn't gotten me in trouble, but I have heard stories from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you pay the title company to do a search?
It depends. It could be anything from $50 of a search. If you're doing them in bulk, if you only have a couple, they might charge you a couple $100, but I mean, it's just part of my investment, upfront so
Sure.
that I don't get in trouble later.
So you'll identify 100 properties, say these 100 I'm interested in bidding on. Would you run title on all these, for me? And then you decide based on kind of their reports, which ones you want to bid on.
Yeah. And making sure you have the correct parcel numbers too.
Oh, it sounds like something that maybe come up for you in the past. Yeah. You can't necessarily trust the tax assessor's information databases always be right. That we've
No, because I've seen bids on properties that are like 20 feet by 50 feet, which absolutely is worthless to anybody who wanted to buy it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So having a good title company to do the research for you, or, educating yourself on how to pull title, again, let the experts do it before you bid. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, even here in Florida, most information is public records. I can find out what the liens are, things like that. I'm still going to rely on the title company.
Yeah. You'd mentioned that you had a fund. Are there a lot of funds out there? What do funds typically pay? If you really want to be hands off, you just want to deploy some money, what does it look like to be in a fund?
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few out there, and obviously they're going to do all the work, and it's just a passive investment, really truly passive investment for you. I've seen anywhere from like 8 to 10%, which is great because, it's still backed by real estate and it's the government paying the interest rate. So you're not really having the concern of maybe a real estate fund that could go into foreclosure. But just do your research, make sure you know who you're getting into investment with.
Sure. Yeah. Now you'd mentioned that you had a fund. Is your fund still open?
Nope, it is currently closed. We reached capacity. We had a lot of cash on hand. And so in order to continue to pay what we were, telling the clients that we're going to pay, we had to close down so that we can deploy the cash. Some point in the future, it might open again, or maybe we start another one.
There you go. That's awesome. All right. So people have listened to this. They're super intrigued. They want to learn more about you and about this business. Where would you want to point them to?
Yeah, best place to find me is Instagram, Empower Her Money. I do a lot of just free education. If you ever have questions, message me. I still check it myself, and I could send you a video back with answering your question.
And that's awesome. So is that just Instagram? Are you on YouTube? Any other socials that we could point them to?
Yep, I have a podcast. It is on YouTube and all the streaming platforms as well. A little bit different topic, still called Empower Her Money, but we talk a lot about money on my podcast because it's what I love to teach.
Well, you are a numbers person, right? Very cool. All right, folks. So check her out on all the socials, Empower Her Money. Angela, thanks so much for coming on today. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Empower Her Money podcast. I am grateful for you. Please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, like this podcast, share it, subscribe, and let's keep teaching others how to take control and be empowered with their finances.